Hello, this is my journal entry for how I was able to do the concept map and what it means in terms of me and how I'm able to kind of organize my thoughts with it. Now, the camera's actually on the opposite side than it usually is because my secondary monitor is on my right. That is where I've done the concept map. And try to talk a little quieter. My throat is not great today. The first thing I thought of was the kind of general topic of just speech vocals. Now, I'm obviously working on speech vocals right now with this mic, and that's kind of where I thought my presentation would start. In the thesis statement document, I went over how to mic speech vocals and also how to mix them, and that was kind of the thought here. But the more broad topic of that is just speech vocals, because we've got worship vocals, we've got Foley, we've got, of course, speech, and then some various other things. But this is specifically just speech, but it still is a broad topic in itself. So the first thing I thought of when it comes to speech vocals is obviously mic placement. Actually, I'm going to zoom out so we can see the whole map. The first thing, when I drew the circle of speech vocals, I thought about mic placement. And there are a few different ways, or actually different places, really. You could have a mic on your head like this. You could have it on a podium, kind of like this is, or I could take this off and have it handheld. And obviously those sound way different, so that would have a big impact on what I would inform the audience of how to actually use it in terms of where the mic is actually placed. And this is an informative speech, so I'm not teaching people how to do this. I'm saying these are the types, these are the things to watch out for with each type. And that transitions to the next thing, which is the type of microphone. There are two types that are usually used with speech vocals: the condensers, which is like the tiny little lapel or lavalier mics, and then dynamic, like a 58, like this one. And so I wouldn't teach how to use each one, because you use them the same way. The speech would be informing the audience of there are these two types, and this is how each type differs from the other. And then the next thing I thought of is, and actually I thought of these two at kind of the same times, post-processing and the overall application of what it is. So post-processing a little easier to explain because it's just a piece of software that has an equalizer, compressor, and maybe a limiter. And I'll get into how this arrow takes into account later. This is fairly simple to inform the audience about. This would be more of a tutorial kind of thing, but it wouldn't be a tutorial. It would be, hey, this is what a tutorial would be like. Not, this is a tutorial. Then I thought, well, what software would I use? Well, in my thesis statement document, I said that I would only use Adobe Audition. So even though this concept map is very broad, I'm trying to narrow it down to one piece of software so that it's not so broad it gets to be too much. So I'm saying Audition as an example. As for the application, that means things like if your speech is going to be held in a lecture hall, if it's going to be held in a classroom, is it just a general events room, or is it like the place I work in, a gymnasium, which is basically an echo chamber? And all those will impact vocals in a certain way. And that's why I think this isn't necessarily trying to be a tutorial. I'm trying to say, look out for these different places. Here's how speech vocals, here's how placement and type and the way you process it depends on its application. And I also thought I didn't necessarily erase these because I thought of these first. I thought specific locations that a speech would be held, a lecture hall, a general events room, or a gymnasium. But then I thought, well, especially nowadays, there are two types of applications. There's an in-person speech and there's an online speech. And those are mixed very differently. A broadcast mix, post-processing, would be heavily limited, not as much EQ, and heavy compression. Whereas an in-person speech might not even have any limiter at all because it would be useless. It would have a good amount of compression and a lot of equalization. So how does the application impact the post-production? Well, it impacts it in those ways that I just said. And that would be the informative part of how these two connect with each other. That's most of the things that I thought of when I was designing this concept map. And actually, concept maps have always not really been a thing for me. And actually, I'm going to go back to F2 for a second because this is how I normally get ideas. I'm okay with sharing this because it's just dumb. So this is how I like to take ideas and take notes and stuff. I just like to put it in a big, long list. And the reason for that is I can kind of... This seems more of a stream of consciousness than a map would be. I can read this and think exactly what I thought about first. I thought of these questions. This was actually for a previous assignment. Usually I'll separate them like this. I thought of this first. This is a stream of not confidence, consciousness. And then I actually wrote this and turned it into a real speech. I didn't read this. I tried to memorize as much as I could and then put it on a kind of teleprompter thing. A better example of a stream of consciousness I have is a pre-roll ideas for a project at work. So I just start listing stuff. I probably wrote some of these at like 11:30 when I was going to sleep just because I think well when I'm not doing anything else. This is how I like to organize ideas. I don't organize them. I just write them down somewhere and then I can organize them in my mind later. That's just how I've always been. Why did F1 just click Google Chrome help? That is most of what my brain was going through when I wrote that concept map, and also why it probably isn't as good as it could have been, just because I don't usually use concept maps to organize ideas. I like making big lists and then organizing those lists later. And both of those help organize my speech, but one does in a more easy to understand and easy to write way, at least in my opinion.